Welcome to the Leaders Who Last podcast. Real talk, real leaders. We hit on strategy, people, and health, where sustainable performance lives. Each episode brings honest conversations, research-based insights, and practical tools to help you lead well and long in a complex world that is not slowing down. Here are your co-hosts, Mary Axelson, leadership strategist and transformation expert, and founder and CEO of WeMax Consulting, where she helps dynamic organizations and leaders reach their fullest potential. And Dr. Kristin Tugman, CEO of Tugman Consulting and a leading expert in disability psychology and return to work strategy. For more than 2 decades, she's helped organizations reduce absence, strengthen well-being, and create cultures where people can thrive. Thanks for listening.
Hi, we're your hosts, Mary and Kristin, and we are going deep today on psychological safety and the cost of silence. I'll set some context for you, and then Kristin will jump in and let you know how we're going to flow through the conversation. So let's set the stage. Really, what we're talking about is who's got your back. According to the Gallup report, employee disengagement, heavily driven by cultures, toxic cultures, and a lack of psychological safety, costs the world economy $9.6 trillion annually. I'm going to say that to you again. The cost of not having psychological safety is $9.6 trillion. Psychological safety is not about comfort or being nice. It's about whether people can tell the truth about their work, their limits, and your decisions without paying for it later. Can I tell you my work is unsustainable? Can I tell you that the strategy is not based in reality? Can I tell you that my health or my care responsibilities outside of work are having an impact on me and the work that I'm trying to do? Or will I be quietly punished? Will I be put to the side? Will I be missed for a promotion that's coming up that I've been working towards? That safety is missing or silently breaking in our organizations. Leaders talk about well-being and inclusion, but then make decisions that ignore what people are really carrying on a day-to-day basis, like caregiving, financial pressure, an unpredictable world that we're dealing with on a daily basis. So when that happens, people often edit, they soften, they filter what they say because honesty no longer feels safe. And it hits female leaders particularly hard as they are responsible for organizational housework. Yes, organizational housework is what I said. And that is the work that women do that is often invisible in organizations. Checking in on their team's well-being, addressing hard moments, letting people know about organizational change and taking the time to process that with them, leading inclusion groups like ERGs with no additional pay. All of that takes energy, right? It takes judgment. It's often expected. It's like an unspoken rule that female leaders will do this type of work. That load is high and the support is low. So often leaving women holding that additional responsibility that impacts the culture and impacts your psychological safety because it is just not okay to say that's too much.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're going to start by defining what psychological safety really means, what is happening in organizations that quietly breaks it. Then we'll discuss a few specific topics around that we think contribute to psychological safety here and now, which are return to office and mental health. And we'll give you an immediate practical steps that you can take back into the office around psychological safety, our typical strategy move, our health check-in, and a power sharing moment.
Yeah, that's great, Kristin. So let's start foundationally and share what does psychological safety actually look like in an organization and what are some of those signals that it's missing?
Yeah, I think psychological safety at its core really is about being able to, as you articulated in the introduction, it comes down to bringing your whole self to work and not having to do I have my work self, I have my home self, because we know that's just not realistic. And so you have to be able to bring your stresses, your concerns, your caregiving responsibilities, and be able to voice things that you need. Life and work bleed together. And I think that's sort of the core foundation. We have psychological safety principles that really are around feedback and growth and development opportunities and work-life balance and the basics of health and safety that we can build a program around. But at its core, it's being able to bring my whole self to work. And so when it shows up at work, you have a more engaged workforce, you have less absenteeism, you have more productivity, you have higher employee loyalty, which leads to less attrition. When it is not present, you have conversations that are typically one-sided, right? So how often do you see in your employee engagement survey that I don't feel like I can be candid? But if you sit a group of people in the room and say, do you feel like you can say what you need? They'll say yes. Okay, what do you need? And then it's crickets. That's a huge sign that you don't have psychological safety. I think one of the key components that I've seen over and over again in employee engagement surveys is this answer to the question, do I have the resources that I need in order to accomplish my work? And when the answer to that is no, it's highly likely that your psychological safety at work is at risk because you've got frustration. Folks don't feel like they are empowered to accomplish the mission and vision that they're tasked with. They don't feel like they can ask for what they need. Often they feel like even if they ask for what they need, they're not going to get it. And so you can see it in the data. I mean, look at your absenteeism. It's hard to measure presenteeism. I would always recommend putting a presenteeism scale in your employee engagement surveys. But absenteeism is a driver. And frankly, just having conversations with your employees that turn out to be one-sided means that it's highly likely that your psychological safety just isn't there.
Yeah, great. So you're starting to get us into what do leaders most misunderstand about psychological safety.
Exactly.
And to be able to answer that question, you have to say, okay, first of all, we have to look at the system, right? And what is the system telling us? What is it rewarding us for? And what is it punishing us for? Because that's going to drive your leadership behavior and that's going to drive your employee behavior. So for example, if I'm a CEO of a public company, and I go to the street to do an earnings share and I talk about profitability and earnings and revenue, yet I don't share to be able to hit those numbers. I then had to do a significant cut in my workforce. You're sending your employees a message, right? You're saying revenue, profitability, earnings is more important than the employee experience and what I have to do as far as my workforce is concerned to be able to hit those numbers, right? We have to think about the system and what the system is driving as far as our behavior is concerned. And then leadership often has a blind spot and they misinterpret employee behavior. So you just gave a really great example around silence, right? I may interpret that silence means agreement, right? Everybody's on board. Yay, let's go team.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, I'm silent because it doesn't feel safe for me to be able to speak up, right? That employees learn that if I say I'm aligned with you, it's rewarded. If I agree, it's safe. If I'm silent, it becomes strategic. That's a strategic choice that I'm making as an employee. So what I would say, if you're not experiencing healthy conflict on your team, if you're not debating topics, if you're not walking out of the room with an elevated solution that's different than the one that you had when you walked in the room, then you don't have psychological safety. And you need to take a step back as a leader and say, what's going on within the system, within the culture, within my leadership, where it's silencing employees and we're not getting that healthy conflict to help us elevate our ideas, right? So I just went to a workshop yesterday through Hogan, certified with them, and they're always doing really great stuff around leadership, behavior, and performance and motivation and values. And so they said that 75% of employees want their leaders to notice how they're feeling. They want them to care about their welfare. So getting back to your point around the whole person, not just the worker bee. They also want their leaders to be driven, strategic, goal-oriented, curious, and creative. So if you bring the care and the nurture, into your leadership, it is not at the expense of results, right? It's actually in support of those results. So employees want to be seen They want to be heard. They want to be valued. They want to be respected. They want to know that they can be vulnerable, that they can share the realities of their life, that they can challenge you, and that you will mutually come together with an outcome or a solution, and that the conflict will be resolved.
I think psychological safety has to be intentional, right? I think too often, like what you described as a myth that people think, or that leaders think, that if an employee is quiet, that they agree. I think that's a really important call out, because psychological safety does have to be intentional. We have to have it be a strategic imperative. The Surgeon General's framework is really useful, and it's anchored in pretty simple concepts around equity and voice. And we came so far post-COVID in terms of recognizing that we have to listen to employees. I mean, that was so important during COVID, where we had to understand from employees of all industries that were on the front lines what's working and what's not working. And if we didn't listen, we weren't going to know, we weren't going to stay productive, and we weren't going to remain successful. And so we sort of came together. I saw it in all industries. We came together and we said, we're going to figure this out in a way that allows us to support each other, listen to each other, change when we need to. And we were wildly successful. And so we brought mental health to the forefront for our workforce. We brought holistic well-being to the forefront for our workforce. And then we had a Surgeon General who came out and supported that. That was amazing, where he said, you do have to listen to your employees. You have to provide a level of equity. And I can just quickly, the tenets of it really talk about protection from harm. And that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to expect that we're going to be safe when we go to work. It's a microcosm of a community. And that microcosm can create life satisfaction, or it can detract from it. And so protection from harm, connection with community, work-life harmony, mattering at work, and opportunity for growth. Again, all anchored in equity and voice. And so I think the most important piece there is your employees have to feel heard. And again, those tenets, we can operationalize those tenets. And it has to be intentional. And if we don't, then we do all get moving too fast. I always talk about being mindful and understanding where our stress level is and taking a breath and understanding what's driving our behavior. We don't do that in the workplace easily, because we all have deadlines. We all have production goals that we have to meet in order to maintain our performance, which is why psychological safety and those tenets I just described have to be intentional. And my view, they have to be a part of performance objectives. Leaders have to have psychological safety performance objectives, or it remain intentional. And I think that's the most important piece to really drive home throughout this podcast, is we have to be intentional.
I love that. Yeah. And I love the fact you're also bringing it back to the system again. What is the system telling us, right? What are we being rewarded and punished for? How have we designed processes that then line up with that reward and that punishment? And if you want true psychological safety, you got to go back and you got to look at those. You got to rework them and have that alignment. So I think that's a great segue for us to go into talking about return to office, right? And
Everyone's favorite topic.
I mean, it's probably to this day, it's like almost every day somebody brings it up. So it is still very relevant.
It can get me fired up, as you know.
And I think it's a great example of whether there's trust in your organization.
Yeah.
Do you trust your employees to get the outcomes that you're aiming for, to have the productivity that you need? Do they have the safety to be able to achieve that? And so I'm always fascinated to hear leaders talk to me about why they have the policy that they have and what is behind it. And I had a client that I was working with that made a decision to have return to office 3 days a week in a large metropolitan area where on average, people are driving an hour and a half to get to work, right? Whether that's by train, bus, or car. And they were really upset about it when it happened, not because they had to actually physically be in the office with each other. They were actually upset about it because they saw it as a productivity loss. So now those 2 to 3 hours that I had in my day, where I had the freedom and the flexibility to make a decision about how I utilize that time, right? So some of that time got used for work. Some of that time got used for family commitments. I remember one leader that I was speaking to, she was really upset because she could no longer drive her daughter to school anymore. It was her senior year in high school. And it was like this precious moment that they had together as a family and a way to start their day.
Mm-hmm.
So now she gets to the campus. She's in the office. It's a large campus. There's several buildings across the campus. People are distributed. So what are they doing? They're sitting in their cubicles,
Right.
still on
Teams
virtual
meeting.
video calls.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's physically impossible for them to actually get from one building to the next in time to attend in-person meetings. And nobody's managing the calendar to allow for the buffer in between, because now you're losing productivity.
Right.
To be able to get from one building to the other. And there's no evidence to suggest that the fact that they're all physically now in the building 3 days a week, that they've achieved better results. In fact, it's probably the opposite,
Mm-hmm.
Because of some of the things that we have just talked about. So it's not an either or decision, right? It's an and decision. And I think what you and I are advocates for is that if you're going to bring people on site, if you're going to say we're better when we're together and that you actually believe that,
Make it
then,
true.
Right. Put the behavior behind it, right?
Yeah.
When are those moments? When are those meetings? When are those pieces of work that you actually do get better results when you're sitting together?
Mm-hmm.
I will always be an advocate for when you're having very strategic discussions where your implications are associated with your business and your workforce. You should get people together to have those
I totally agree.
conversations,
Yeah.
minimize the distractions, have people be focused, utilize the connections, because you will get a better outcome. But if mistrust is driving your decision, right? If you have a false belief that people are more productive when they're together, but yet they aren't.
Right.
And we're using the evidence from COVID of how we were able to work 100% virtually. If I'm using evidence of other companies that work in a distributed, workforce and they are being productive, right? That's just a really good example of how you don't have psychological safety because you're sending a message to your employees, to your leaders, that you don't trust them to be able to do the work unless they're physically in the building. And I know you have another point of view on this, Kristin, around what's driving some of that behavior.
Yeah, I just wish that employers would be transparent for the reasons behind they want people back in the office. And, if it's logistical, just say that. I know some companies that had just bought a commercial building right before COVID. Not their fault. They couldn't have predicted that the next pandemic since 1918 was going to occur. That's okay. They didn't, and they didn't want to lose money on that building, and they wanted to continue to keep their footprint in that particular city. We know there's tax breaks that are associated with having your footprint in a city, saying that I'm going to bring people into the city to spend money. Absolutely. That's okay. That's business. But just say that to folks rather than bringing them into an office, making them commute in a way that disrupts their lives, making them commute in a way that is tone deaf in terms of if you have a frontline worker who is your lowest paid employee and let's just say a call center worker, and you're the senior VP and you have the luxury of maybe one of the partners staying home and taking care of the kids. And your salary is such that you don't necessarily need to worry about gas money, but you're requiring that your frontline worker who makes much less, maybe $22 an hour, to pay $4 a gallon in gas and come in and stress over who's going to be at the bus to make sure that their kid is safe and makes it to school on time. When you think about psychological safety, you have to think about your entire workforce and the needs of the workforce. Now, Gen Z does want to come in the office. They want to build relationships in the office. They want the flexibility. They want hybrid. So I'm not saying that I'm fully in favor of all remote. I think it depends on the nature of your workforce, the needs of your workforce, and the ever-changing needs of our current chaos that is our society. You've got to continue to assess the needs of your workforce and be realistic. Because I'm telling you right now, if today you're not addressing the fact that gas prices are going up and you're requiring your lower income employees to drive to work every day, you're giving them a message.
Yeah,
And that
I love
message is
this.
that your needs aren't being met. We
Yeah,
don't care.
exactly. Exactly, Kristin. And so what this also has me think is that there was so much innovation going on right now in the world. Like I literally can't keep track of all the innovation that we're being told about on a daily basis. Yet, when we think about leadership and workforce, we're still so antiquated in the way that we lead and we manage and the way that we want our employees to operate. And I think that is the thing that I want leaders to walk away with is that you have to innovate who you are, the way you lead to be able to do what it is that you just described. There is no one size fits all approach to the workforce anymore. We have 5 generations in the workforce with different needs. We have companies operating in different models as far as on-site, hybrid, 100% distributed. We have a portfolio life that's driving the workforce right now where they don't want to be 100% committed to one particular employer or entity. They want multiple streams of income coming in different ways. We have baby boomers exiting the workforce. And there is a 911 call here for employers that the innovation that you're driving as far as your products and your services are concerned, that innovation also has to come through in the way that you lead and the way that you think about your workforce and you attract, engage, and reward them. So I think it's a really great point for us to hit on. So talking about innovation and disruptive change that's happening, let's go to AI, right? Because AI is both a strategy and a trust issue. Everybody's very focused on AI right now, as they should be. It's a disruptive technology that can do amazing things. Lots of company, BCPE, lots of money going into AI and the development of it. And it's really changing our world. Super fascinating, right? It's exciting. Yet, what we're seeing is organizations are layering AI on a broken system. There's a belief that you can't bring employees into these conversations, that they can't handle the uncertainty associated with it. Yet, you bring the technology, you expect them to utilize it. They see their jobs being eliminated. They're not a part of those decisions, yet they're left to deal with the aftermath associated with it. So, Kristin, let's talk a little bit about if you're bringing AI into your organization, what does an honest conversation look like with employees where you can invite them into that decision, have them be a part of deciding how that's going to work. So they're positioned to actually help the company gain the benefits associated with it. What does that kind of conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think AI is contributing to the mental health crisis because, to your point, employers aren't addressing it effectively. But AI, it scares me for a whole host of reasons. As a clinician, we've seen people use AI to their detriment. There's AI suicide coaches. There's AI that have taken people down a rabbit hole and created a psychotic break. So I think we have a lot to learn about AI. And frankly, again, as a clinician, if it were me, I would pull it back because the second that that sort of thing happens, we're not ready. The technology is not ready. That's not going to happen because corporate America sees what they see and it's a new technology. It's a new efficiency. And we've seen that since the Industrial Revolution, a new efficiency, we're all in. So my concern, and I've been saying this for months, is that corporate America is going to go too far in one direction with heavily leveraging AI. They're going to take it too far. And I think the stress that's causing the exacerbation of the mental health crisis among employees is because they see that. Employees are smart, right? They see what corporate America does. It's all about efficiency, and they see it going too far and with resulting layoffs. And then likely, I think Ford actually just came back and said they had to rehire people because they overestimated the impact and the ability of their AI technology. So case in point. So what I would say to you as an employer is tackle that head on. We're not going to go too far. We're going to take baby steps. We're going to understand how this AI can take administrative tasks off of your plate. We're going to train you effectively in how to use the AI so that you are skilled up in a way that allows you and your work to evolve with the AI evolution and continued integration into the workforce. I think there's another thing that is completely missed, and I just thought of it as we were talking about Gen Z, sort of brought this up in my mind for me. And that's that Gen Z is very concerned about climate change, as we all should be. AI is exacerbating climate change on the daily. Those data centers are creating toxicity within our water supply. They're putting undue pressure on the power grid. So when I talk about the mental health aspects of AI, I really think the climate impacts should also make us rethink how we deploy it. But again, we're not doing that because we're a capitalistic society. I think we, as employers, you have to understand your workforce and what they value. And if you are jumping with both feet into integrating AI into your organization, you might have some cognitive dissonance among some of your employees around what they value and how AI is negatively impacting the climate. And I would be prepared to have that conversation. So that was just something that popped into my head that I think is really important to consider.
Yeah, it's great too, because we don't always talk about those environmental impacts. And we do know that that workforce has a lot of passion, as they should, as we need people to in that area. So let's talk about an employer who is getting it right, Kristin. So earlier this year, I did a study with Chief Human Resource, Chief People Officers, and created the 2026 People Insight Report. And that was a combination of a survey and interviews. And during one of my interviews, the CHRO talked about the way that they manage restructures and job eliminations, and they're a tech company. So it fits really great with this conversation. And she said, we have a policy of 100% no job eliminations. That is our aspiration. That is our goal. So when business conditions change, and we have the foresight to see that, because it does require foresight, and back to your point earlier, and intention, we start having conversations around what is that restructure going to look like? What are the type of jobs and skills that we're going to need? How is that going to negatively impact portions of our workforce, like whose job is at risk? And what do we need to do now in preparation for that change so that we can upskill and reskill our workforce and get them ready? They have a 98% reabsorption rate as a result of that policy. So not 100%, but that is the aim. That is a goal. So what does that tell your workforce? It tells your workforce that we care about you, and we know that business conditions change. We're going to have the foresight, the discipline, and the intention to see that coming, and we're going to get ready, right? So that when we have to make that change, we've already reskilled you and upskilled you so that we could make that move. They also do it in a way where they don't ask people to do two jobs. So now we want you to still do your current job, and then we want you to do your job that you're ready for, right? They look at the work and they say, what is the work? And how do we incrementally bring those employees that are going to be impacted into the work, right? The other behavior that addresses is that sometimes we use job eliminations as a way to performance manage people, right? We don't want to have the tough conversations. We don't want to have to give constructive feedback. If I just wait long enough, right, there'll be a restructure that comes along and a job elimination, and I'll be able to address that employee issue that way. Well, guess what? If your organization has 100% expectation that you're going to reabsorb employees when restructures happen, you no longer can do that. So you have to have real, honest conversations with people, letting them know what they're doing well and then where they have areas to work on, because you're not going to be able to use a job elimination as your scapegoat. So they have a high trust environment. Employees feel safe. They come together and have challenging conversations with each other. And their retention rate is, I think it's less than 9%, right? I think the standard before COVID was somewhere around 9 to 10%
Mm-hmm.
was considered healthy turnover, and they're actually below that. So you can do this hard work. You
Right.
can be innovative and secure that psychological safety that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing.
you started to talk a little bit about mental health. Before we make our shift and go into strategy move, health check-in, power sharing moment, is there any other points that you really want to hit on that mental health piece before we leave it?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously having a psychologically safe workplace is going to improve the mental health of your workforce. And I mean, the fastest growing disability claim bucket right now. So reasons that people are away from work or absent from work due to a health condition is mental health. So we continue to be in a significant mental health crisis. The best place, in my view, one of the best places to recognize when somebody needs something is at work, because we know each other, we know our habits, we know our mood, generally how we present, we know when somebody's off, typically, hey, you never miss a deadline and now you're missing deadlines. It gives us the opportunity to really observe behavior in a way that allows us to say, geez, I notice you're not yourself. Do you need something? And allowing that level of support, right? That is one of the foundations of psychological safety in a leader, to say, oh, I've recognized, versus jumping to the conclusion it's a performance issue. I think from a mental health perspective, leaders, when I talk to employers, the number one concern is healthcare costs. Number two concern is the mental health of my employees because they're absent. And so again, a psychological safety can certainly, again, improve the mental health of your workforce, but psychological safety around mental health doesn't mean just throwing resources at the employee population. It's not just, hey, here, have this resilience program, have this mindfulness program, here's an EAP. It's actually a leadership style, and requires leadership training to recognize when somebody needs something, to perform empathic leadership, to really know my employees such that I recognize when they're not themselves. And employees expect that. You just mentioned the statistic with Hogan. I did a Gen Z study, and ready or not, folks, Gen Z is coming into the workplace. They consider, for them, mental health is just life. And so I did a qualitative study, and I interviewed about 15 Gen Zers. And one of the things that they said is, I expect my manager to know me well enough to know if I might be struggling from a mental health perspective, and ask me if I'm okay. And they also said, I'm going to bring my mental health to work. I don't expect you to fix it, but it's just a thing. I'm going to talk about it. So we need to normalize mental health, and that is a key construct of psychological safety. And again, don't just throw resources at it and tell somebody to go see an EAP. Invest in training and invest in the infrastructure around psychological safety, and in empowering your managers to know what to do and how to have those conversations. I think that's the most important thing. So I think we're ready. Let's move on to Mary, the strategy move.
Yeah. So I want you to treat psychological safety as a source of information. That before you make a major people decision, ask yourself, who is this the hardest on and why? Right? Ask yourself as an individual, and then bring your leadership team together and ask that same question. Bring the team together and ask them that question. And then after you get that response, are there any realities as far as the change is concerned, or what's going on in our culture right now that we're ignoring? Why are we ignoring it? And then what changes do we need to make so that we can elevate our safety, so that people can actually tell us what's going on before the damage is done? And Kristin gave you some really great examples at the beginning of the podcast as far as some of those stats that you track that can tell you how much damage, how much is broken in your organization. So that's my strategy move, Kristin. What's your health check-in?
All right, health check-in. So I would say go to those statistics, look at your disability data, look at your mental health claims, look at your intermittent FMLA, which I know we're constantly looking at because it's frustrating and it makes productivity unpredictable. Look at your employee engagement survey and try to pinpoint what is it that you think is a gap around your employees feeling like they can come to you and give candid feedback. I think feedback is one of the biggest drivers of psychological safety. And The other piece, if you're consistently getting the no answer to the question, do I have the resources I need in order to be successful at my job? That is a huge red flag. And so I would say, again, look at the data and then get a group of people together. I love listening sessions. I've talked about that before, but get a department together and ask them the question, what do you need in order to be successful at your work? What will make your lives easier? And then listen, giving them a voice and giving them the ability to give that feedback with an attempt to address the feedback is going to go a really long way. So I would say, again, get a group of people together, listen to them, give them a voice, and do your best to either implement the feedback or help them understand the reason behind a delay in implementing it or an inability to implement it. But talk to your people and listen to your people.
We're going to say that over and over again, aren't we, Kristin? Right? Listen, bring together. Do something with it.
It has to be
if there's three things
friend.
we can give you. Yeah. So from a power sharing moment, one of the things that Kristin and I believe is that baby steps equal big moves. Right. So we're always sharing with leaders about what is something small, low risk that you can take action on, gives you the ability to experiment, and then you can take that and you can apply it, and eventually it gets to bigger moves. So what we want you to do this week is we want you to think about a problem that you're trying to solve for. Something small, low risk, especially if it's something that you believe as a leader you're supposed to solve. Okay. And we want you to take it to your team. We want you to put yourself in a vulnerable position and say, I'm going to try something new with you. We've got this problem. I was feeling like it's something I needed to solve for, or it was something I was feeling like I didn't want to burden you with. I know you all are busy. You have a lot on your plate. And I would like us to come together to have a conversation around, is this really the problem? Or is there some other root cause that I don't see, that I don't realize? So get clear on the problem and what you're solving for. And then do a brainstorming session and say, how might we solve for this problem? And then give people the space and the grace to go off and digest it. We often think that we can come together and immediately solve problems, right? We have introverts, we have extroverts. Sometimes we have to go out and get additional information and then bring your team back together so that you can do that same step again and then walk away with actions and assign owners. But start small, something low risk, give people time to process, and then come back together and identify what that solution is going to be and what the accountability is. All right. So psychological safety becomes real when people can tell you the truth. Learn from that response. Learn from the truth makes a difference. And that's where psychological safety sits. And that honesty is welcome. The decision is whether leaders will treat the honesty as a problem to manage or as information they need to build healthier, sustainable work environments. That is where healthier cultures and more sustainable performance begins. Kristin, I've loved this conversation with you. Can't wait for the next time.
All right, next time. Thanks for listening.